Hey everyone, welcome back. We all want to understand the big stuff, right? Like really get to the heart of what's going on in the world, especially when it comes to something as complex and, let's be honest, sometimes confusing as Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
So today we're going to do a deep dive trying to cut through the noise and the hype to explore some of the core ideas behind Bitcoin. And we're going to do this by taking a look at Michael Saylor's recent presentation, his 21 Truths of Bitcoin from the Digital Asset Summit in 2025.
It's good.
Now, we all know the price of Bitcoin can go up and down like crazy, but what we're really interested in today is going beyond that daily roller coaster. We're going deeper into the fundamental thinking, the ideology that underpins Bitcoin. We want to understand what makes it tick, what makes it so different from, well, everything else out there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
The goal is to extract like the real aha moments, the key insights that will hopefully give you a much clearer picture of what Bitcoin is all about without getting bogged down in, a bunch of technical jargon.
Yeah, keep it simple for us.
So right off the bat, one of the most interesting things Saylor does is he frames Bitcoin not simply as, a cool new technology or just another investment, but as something much more deeply connected to like these really fundamental human ideals and values.
Yeah, that's what I found so fascinating about his presentation is like he sees Bitcoin as almost a digital expression of a certain philosophical viewpoint.
Exactly. Like he lays out these really big, almost timeless conflicts, right? These tensions that he believes Bitcoin speaks to. Things like freedom versus control, or the drive for innovation versus kind of getting stuck in the old ways of doing things, or even the concepts of owning property and having financial security versus, well, potentially living in poverty. It's pretty sweeping vision.
It is. And it's interesting how he connects these ideas to like thinkers throughout history, right? He mentions economists from the Austrian school, guys like Hayek and von Mises. Then he brings in Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire, and he even talks about the principles that are enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. So he's really trying to show how these age-old debates about how society should be organized, how power should be distributed, how we should think about things like freedom and prosperity. Well, he's arguing that these are actually baked into Bitcoin's DNA.
It's like he's saying these ideas are not just abstract concepts. They're like woven into the very fabric of Bitcoin. It's almost like you could think of Bitcoin's ideology as the operating system for a whole new way of thinking about the world, or like the core principles of a whole new social movement.
That's a really good analogy.
And then, building on that base of ideas, Saylor moves on to talk about how Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious creator of Bitcoin, actually put these ideas into practice. He built the Bitcoin protocol itself. And what Saylor emphasizes is that, the specific rules and parameters of Bitcoin, they weren't just arbitrary choices.
Right.
Things like, the hard cap of 21 million Bitcoins that'll ever exist, or the way blocks of transactions are processed, or the fact that there's roughly a 10-minute interval between those blocks, or even the specific type of cryptography they use, that SHA-256 algorithm. All of that was deliberate, designed to bring that underlying ideology to life in the real world.
Right. He's saying these specific choices were made to create a system that actually embodies those values of freedom, decentralization, and individual empowerment.
Exactly. And, he points out that, technically things could have been set up differently, right? They could have chosen a different mathematical base for the system, or they could have even programmed it in a totally different computer language. But the decisions they made, he argues, were specifically intended to foster those things: prosperity and economic empowerment.
Interesting.
Think of it this way. It's as if the Bitcoin protocol is the fundamental grammar, the unbreakable rules of a brand new global digital language for value exchange.
Right.
And just like, the core rules of grammar in English or any other language tend to remain pretty stable, even as, slang and usage evolve, Saylor is suggesting that the Bitcoin protocol is designed to be this kind of enduring foundation, even as the technology around it, like the hardware and the software, continues to develop.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's fascinating. So from there, Saylor kind of lays out his case for why he believes Bitcoin is what he calls an apex asset, right? Arguing that it's actually superior to traditional commodities like gold or oil, and even superior to, government-issued currencies like the dollar or the euro. And he starts to kind of sketch out the unique characteristics of Bitcoin that lead him to this pretty bold conclusion.
Right. And one of the first things he points out is that, with Bitcoin, The network itself is the asset.
Yeah, it's not just some digital token that represents something else.
Exactly. It's this incredibly powerful, globally distributed computing infrastructure,
Yeah.
and that's what gives Bitcoin its value.
And then she describes Bitcoin as immaculate,
Mhm.
which sounds kind of strange at first, but what he means is that it was essentially, gifted to the world,
Yeah.
launched without any initial controlling entity or like unfair advantage for its creator, whoever Satoshi Nakamoto really is. And then he calls Bitcoin ethical because it's designed to be resistant to things like inflation, that constant devaluation of currencies that we see with government issued money. It's also resistant to being easily seized or confiscated, and it can't be controlled or manipulated by any single authority.
That immaculate conception idea is really interesting because
Yeah.
it speaks to this fundamental fairness that's built into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right? There was no pre-mine, no group of insiders who got to benefit unfairly from the start.
Exactly. It was this, this kind of pure launch into the world, which makes it very different from, well, pretty much every other financial system or asset that we're used to.
Yeah. And this understanding of Bitcoin's unique characteristics leads Saylor to make a really critical point. He defines Bitcoin as a commodity and more specifically, a digital commodity.
Yeah, that distinction seems to be really important to him.
It is. And he explains that, from a legal and financial perspective, being classified as a commodity has significant advantages for Bitcoin, particularly when it comes to like expressing opinions about its potential future value.
Which is probably why you hear such strong opinions, right, about where Bitcoin's price might go,
Yep.
Something that would be much more legally restricted if it were classified, say, as a security.
Right. Exactly.
But Saylor goes even further than that. He argues that unlike traditional physical commodities like oil or gold, Bitcoin supply isn't going to increase significantly in response to, technological advancements or even rising prices. Like he even mentions how gold, for all its history as a safe haven asset, has actually underperformed the stock market over the long term.
Yeah, which is a really good point because people often talk about gold as this, this inflation hedge, this store of value.
Right, the classic safe haven.
But if you look at the data, it hasn't actually done that great compared to, say, investing in a broad basket of stocks. And Saylor is saying that with Bitcoin, because of that fixed supply, that 21 million cap, we're not going to see that kind of inflationary pressure or that same dynamic of supply increasing just because the price goes up.
Right. And this is where the digital nature of Bitcoin becomes like super important. Saylor emphasizes that Bitcoin, as a creation of, human ingenuity in the digital realm, has some unique advantages over those physical commodities. Like it can be transferred almost instantly across the globe with just a few clicks, and it can be seamlessly integrated with, all these other emerging digital technologies like artificial intelligence and advanced security systems.
Yeah, that's a huge advantage that Bitcoin has over something like gold. Like, if you want to send gold to someone on the other side of the world, you have to physically ship it, which takes time, it costs money, there's all sorts of security risks. But with Bitcoin, it's just a few keystrokes, and it's done.
Yeah, it's like trying to mail a gold bar versus sending an email. It's just a completely different world.
Totally.
And, Saylor points out this really interesting development that's been happening, which is that the U.S. government seems to be at least starting to recognize Bitcoin as the digital commodity. He even mentions that in a recent executive order, they actually referred to it as digital gold.
Yeah, that was the deal.
It feels like a pretty significant step towards mainstream acceptance and, legitimacy for Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Because when you have the government, especially a government like the U.S. government, acknowledging Bitcoin in that way, it lends it a certain credibility, right? It says,
Yeah.
okay, this is something serious. This is something that's here to stay.
Yeah, it's not just some fringe internet thing anymore.
Yeah.
And, this official recognition really reinforces that idea of Bitcoin as digital gold, which Saylor sees as a really powerful way for, the broader public, people who aren't necessarily deep into the tech or the finance, to grasp its role as a long-term store of value.
Yeah. Right. It's a familiar concept. Gold is a safe haven. And by calling Bitcoin digital gold, it gives people a frame of reference, a way to start understanding what Bitcoin might represent.
Yeah. And he even suggests that given the inherent advantages of digital assets in our increasingly digital world, Bitcoin could, at some point actually surpass the market value of physical gold, which is a pretty mind-blowing idea if you think about it.
It is, because gold has been, that ultimate store of value for
It
centuries.
was millennia, yeah.
But Saylor's basically saying, hey, in the digital age, digital gold might just eat the lunch of physical gold.
Yeah. But he doesn't stop there. He also introduces this concept of Bitcoin as digital money, which is like a form of money that you can hold directly and you can transfer to anyone else in the world without needing any kind of intermediary, like a bank or a payment processor.
Right. So it's very different from the way we're used to transacting digitally today, where we're relying on these centralized platforms and, often paying fees or dealing with delays.
Exactly. He's talking about like true peer-to-peer digital cash. And he points out the potential for, really fast, low-cost transactions directly between individuals and even between machines in the future, which is a whole other, rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah, think about the implications for like the Internet of Things, where machines are constantly interacting and exchanging value with each other. Bitcoin could really facilitate that kind of seamless machine-to-machine economy.
Right. It's pretty wild to think about. And this idea of, Bitcoin as digital money kind of leads Saylor to a more theoretical, almost philosophical point, which is this idea of Bitcoin as perfect money. He brings up the work of those economists we mentioned earlier, Hayek and von Mises, who spent a lot of time thinking about like the ideal characteristics of money, but they didn't have the technology to really imagine how those characteristics could be fully realized in the real world.
Yeah. Right. They understood the problems with, government-controlled currencies and the limitations of physical commodities like gold, but they didn't have the tools to conceive of something like Bitcoin.
Exactly. And Saylor argues that Bitcoin, thanks to all this modern technology like the internet and cryptography, actually achieves this ideal of perfect money because its supply is fixed, it's decentralized, nobody can just print more of it or manipulate it to their advantage. And he even suggests that this could lead to like a more stable and scientific foundation for economic thought, which is, a pretty bold claim.
It is, but it's also a really thought-provoking idea, right? Because if you have a form of money that is truly sound, that can't be debased or inflated away, well, that could have a profound impact on how we think about economics, how we make decisions, how we plan for the future.
Yeah, it's definitely something to ponder. And this idea of perfect money ties in directly with the increasing legitimacy that Saylor sees around Bitcoin. Like, he draws this really clear contrast between, the regulatory uncertainties and the negative perceptions that surrounded Bitcoin just a few years ago, back in, like 2020, 2021, and the growing acceptance that he observes in 2025.
Yeah, it's amazing how much the landscape has changed in just a few years.
It really is. And he particularly highlights the U.S. government's apparent decision not to sell its Bitcoin holdings, which, back in 2020, they actually seized a bunch of Bitcoin in that Silk Road case. So the fact that they're now holding on to it, it sends a really strong signal.
Yeah, it suggests that they see Bitcoin as a strategic asset, something worth holding on to for the long term.
Exactly. And this increasing legitimacy, Saylor argues, is a big part of what's driving more and more corporations to adopt Bitcoin as a treasury asset.
It makes sense, right? Because if you're a company and you're looking for a safe haven, a way to protect your capital from inflation or geopolitical uncertainty, Bitcoin starts to look really appealing.
Yeah. He explains that companies are starting to realize that, holding this unique digital commodity with a limited supply might be a much smarter long-term strategy than just relying on traditional investments like bonds or commodities that could, potentially underperform. And he mentions that, there's a growing number of publicly traded companies that are adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets. And there's also this increasing availability of Bitcoin ETFs, which makes it easier for even more investors, big and small, to get exposure.
Right. And those ETFs are a big deal because they make it much easier for your average person to invest in Bitcoin.
Right.
They don't have to worry about setting up a crypto wallet or dealing with exchanges. They can just buy shares in an ETF through their regular brokerage account.
Right, it's much more accessible. And this growing corporate adoption, it really cements Bitcoin's role as this truly global asset, which is another key truth that Saylor highlights.
Yeah. And that global nature is so important because, it means that anyone, anywhere in the world, can participate in this shared digital economy.
It doesn't matter where you live, what your background is, what currency you use, you can have access to Bitcoin. And Saylor, he uses this example of like someone in Arkansas in the middle of the U.S. potentially benefiting from, economic activity in Tokyo on the other side of the world simply by holding Bitcoin.
Right, because the value of Bitcoin is determined by this global network of users, not by any one country or central bank.
It's truly borderless. And this global reach kind of ties into his concept of Bitcoin's immortality.
Immortality. That's an interesting word choice.
It is. What he's getting at is that because the underlying protocol is so robust and the desire to own this, scarce digital asset is likely to persist, he suggests that Bitcoin has this enduring quality, unlike, physical assets or even companies, which all have finite lifespans.
It's like owning a tiny piece of something fundamentally valuable in the digital age and potentially forever.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And then Saylor throws out this really fascinating concept. He starts talking about viewing a Satoshi, which is the smallest unit of Bitcoin. There's 100 million Satoshis in one Bitcoin, as digital energy.
Digital energy. That's a new one.
It is. But his point is that this digital energy is becoming increasingly vital for, the operation of all this stuff like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, the metaverse, the whole expanding digital world. And he's hinting that Bitcoin could become like a fundamental resource, a fuel for cyberspace itself.
So it's not just the store of value, it's also this crucial input for all these digital processes and systems.
Exactly. It's like the electricity that powers the digital world. And if individual Satoshis are, like little units of digital energy, then the entire Bitcoin network becomes this vast digital energy network, right?
Yeah.
Allowing for incredibly fast and efficient transfers of value all across the globe in ways that traditional financial systems, even with all their technology, just can't match. And this, in turn, leads to this idea of Bitcoin as a foundational layer for a digital economic system. A system that enables seamless transactions between individuals, companies, and even those digital entities we were talking about, like AIs and smart contracts.
Yeah, it's like the circulatory system of the digital economy, moving value around quickly and efficiently.
And then, in a bit of a surprising twist, Saylor suggests that this digital energy network can actually act as a digital defense system as well.
A defense system.
Yeah, like the sheer computational power of the Bitcoin network, which is often measured by its hash rate,
Mm.
how many calculations per second the network can process, that can provide a really significant layer of security for digital assets and other digital systems. It's essentially creating this incredibly powerful cryptographic shield.
So the more people use Bitcoin, the more secure the network becomes, and that security can then be used to protect other digital assets and systems.
Exactly. It's like this positive feedback loop, right? More users, more security, which attracts more users and so on. And finally, Saylor concludes with this really compelling metaphor. He compares Bitcoin to an emerging solar system.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
He's arguing that its value and its influence, they're not just growing linearly with adoption, like, more users equals more value in a straight line. He sees it as this more like a Newtonian system where the more capital and energy are drawn into it, the greater its gravitational pull becomes, and that attracts even more resources and influence.
So it's like this self-reinforcing system where the bigger it gets, the faster it grows.
Exactly. And he even compares it to a white dwarf star, these incredibly dense, collapsed stars with immense gravity. He's saying that Bitcoin, in a similar way, is becoming this incredibly powerful force, reshaping the entire financial landscape around it.
That's a powerful image.
It is. So as you can hear, this deep dive into Saylor's perspective reveals that Bitcoin is so much more than just, a fluctuating price on a chart. It's this complex phenomenon with deep philosophical roots, built on this incredibly robust and enduring technological foundation, and with increasingly profound implications for, the future of economics and the entire digital world. Understanding these core truths, these fundamental ideas, it gives you a much richer and more informed perspective on Bitcoin's potential significance.
It really does. And it naturally leads to a crucial question for all of us. Considering this emerging solar system of Bitcoin, how might it reshape the global financial order as we know it, and what role did each of us see ourselves potentially playing within its orbit? It's something worth thinking about for sure.
Absolutely. And if you found this deep dive into Saylor's 21 Truths insightful, we'd love for you to, follow, like, and share this podcast with anyone you think might be interested. And if you want to stay up to date with all things Bitcoin, be sure to follow What Bitcoin Taught Me on Twitter, X, Nostr, Bluesky, Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Until next time, keep on learning.